wanted to clarify something because I feel like this is something that kind of has come up a lot in SGA. So when we do resolutions and we do different legislation, oftentimes it's not really necessarily a full-on plan on how we're going to execute XYZ policy and how we're going to pay for it and how it's going to get built. That's not really, we don't really have the power to do that because we don't sit on like the budget priorities committee and we're not administrators. So we don't necessarily have a lot of control as far as like the technicalities of how things are going to get played out. But what SGA does do is provide a student voice, saying the students feel like this is important, therefore we take these pieces of legislation to administrators and then have those conversations with them on how can we execute it, what can we do. So for example, last year, the idea of a Women and Gender Center came up in SGA, and this is something that actually turned into a piece of legislation that now I can talk to Dr. Dunn from Institutional Diversity on, okay, what can we do to have something, and it's now a Gender Equity Center that we're working is up on the Budget Priorities Committee, things like that. So the legislation that we pass in SGA almost will never actually have a full-out plan of how this is going to play out, where the room is going to be, how much is it going to cost. Those aren't things we really have to worry about as students, but it's really just our voices. Do we think that something like this is necessary? Do we think it's important? Things like that are the things that we can definitely actually address and say, yes, the student body does support this, or no, the student body doesn't support this. But that's something that definitely, like, when you do have those concerns, obviously voice them, because when this legislation, if it passes or if it doesn't, then those are kind of points that we can bring up once we do get to that point of, in the administration, how are we going to do this? So those are like student concerns on the piece are always included with those conversations. Like, okay, we passed this, but there's student concerns saying that, you know, how are we going to get people to respect them? How many spaces do we need? Things like that are kind of later down the line, if that makes sense. So if we can't necessarily like figure out those issues now, it doesn't necessarily mean that like we can't pass the legislation, because again, we don't have really the authority, I guess, as students to make those decisions.
And Marty,